think you guys have probably looped back through this before, and it's kind of an interesting thing to think about, you know, self-defense in yoga, because, you know, who needs to be defended? And so not in yoga, then when we were talking about self-defense, instead of talking about, you know, defending the ego or defending an egoic position, it becomes a practice of how to remain connected to yourself in various circumstances. So it's not really an external thing. Yeah, of course, external self-defense is a good thing to have, and it's really, you know, practical. Is, you know, we have bodies and all of these things. But then what becomes really interesting too is how do we maintain that connection to Source as we move through the world. And so this is, you know, I guess this is a little bit different way of looking at the practice of yoga. And so in this world, we're exposed to energies, various energies that, you know, push or pull one way or another. And then how do you remain connected to your deepest heart as you move through the world? This has real practical applications, because when I get disconnected from my source, that manifests as obviously depression a lot of times, or fear, you know, isolation, in all these ways. And so these practices of, you know, what can you guys think of any practices that you would use to remain connected?
Like aside from meditation
or meditation?
That's just
Right.
meditation or japa, like a mantra.
A japa, a mantra, having a mantra available to you in various situations. So, you know, it's this interesting thing, because a lot of times when we think about yoga practice, we're in the studio or we're in a quiet space, we're in our meditation room. But then when it becomes really interesting is how do you take that practice out into the world? And so we can look at, how do I maintain this space when I go to work? Or, you know, if you don't have a stressful job, you know, you could imagine, a lot of people do, or, you know, situations like war, situations that may be violent. How do we maintain this connectedness? Any thoughts about that?
Like not turning away from what is.
Not turning away from what is?
Yeah, like if it's violent or if it's uncomfortable, if it's maybe in opposition to like where you would usually place your energy, to remain really present with what's happening and awake to what's coming through.
Yes. Can you even think of a traumatic situation? You don't have to give us details, but can you remember having been in a traumatic situation since you've had your yoga practice? And so a lot of these practices that we do on the mat, it just kind of seems like it's just for relaxation or just for you know, for exercise or for spiritual unfoldment. When you find yourself in a situation that's really traumatic, these become vital tools. And so, it can be the difference between, someone who doesn't have these tools being like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, type of energetic frequency. That's a frequency. Right? That affects our ability to respond. It affects our ability to deal with whatever it is that we have to deal with, or your ability to breathe, or even detach. And so this is something, when we talk about detachment, that's something I feel like gets a bad rap in yoga, being detached, or even disassociation. So this, certainly for some people who've disassociated with an experience that's happened to them in their lives, that can be really scary because we've in some way lost our connection to the body. But then when we're looking at in yoga, there's an element of that's actually what we're practicing in some way. Okay? A disassociation, to be able to step back, disassociate with your body, disassociate with the mind, to step back and then be able to see the mind. So the association was identification. And so as thoughts arise, I see those thoughts and identify with them. But this ability to step back is this incredible tool. So, when we're sitting in meditation, it's one thing to step back. A lot of times our thoughts might be pleasurable. We may not totally want to step back. It may be enticing, the thoughts that we're having. We're having thoughts about desire, or even, thoughts of jealousy or resentment, but we enjoy it on some level. And so we kind of want to identify. But there's times and situations and spaces where there's an intensity level where it could be really beneficial to step back from having to react emotionally or psychologically to a situation. And then in that moment, ask the question of what needs to be done here. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So these are powerful tools in this way. We're not really, I don't know if this is really talking about dealing with past traumas, but there's an element of that too, to be able to step back and dissociate. Again, my sense is that on some level there's this, we want to be careful because some people have dissociated and they don't know how to get back. But when we're talking about dissociation, we're talking about from a pattern of habitually identifying with body and mind, being able to step back and then see it. And then from that place, ask, what is the highest way that I can serve in this situation? What is is it to calmly call 911 or whatever, whatever needs to happen. So this is one piece of this. Another piece is energies. So we've talked about ahimsa, and one of the things that we may experience in the world is kind of these entanglements of relationships. And so have you ever been in a situation where you're where you felt I don't want to say dominated by another person? And a lot of times this happens in really subtle ways, because someone can walk through the door and an entire room full of people turns and takes on the frequency of that person, even though it might not even have been intentional. As someone else can walk through the door and no one notices, just based on the way that we hold our energies. But one of the ways that I'm coming to understand ahimsa, some of the more subtle levels of ahimsa, is as trying to control the narrative of another. And so this is, I like this definition because it takes us away from kind of the gross violence, like so-and-so punched me in the face. Okay, that's violent. We can agree that's violent. But why is that violent? Is really because that punch in the face was trying to control someone's narrative. Like, it's got to the point like where it was so much so that I'm actually going to try to physically control your narrative, you know. Is that we had a disagreement, and for some reason that, you know, so that's on one level. But on a more subtle level, you may find this in relationships, and a lot of times it may be in relationships that are not necessarily violent relationships, or not even that there's that intention. Maybe it's with your partner or with your friend, but someone says, you did this, or you feel this way. Someone tells you you're feeling, why are you so angry? Have you ever had anyone say that to you? Mm-hmm. Why are you so angry? Calm down. Right, what's the problem then? It seems on the surface to be just like, you know, someone stepping back, but really what's happening is someone is trying to speak for you. So I may be angry, but now you're speaking for me, and actually if I were to speak, maybe it's more complex than that. And so it's a subtle thing that it's interesting to start to become aware of when other people speak for you. Has anyone noticed that before? Mm-hmm. So this is another piece of it. And this is another thing that yoga has helped me to recognize. So a lot of times we don't recognize when someone's speaking for us, because the nature of that is that it's kind of commingling our energies. And so it can be hard to tell sometimes what's mine and what's yours. You just said this about me, and I'm trying to figure out, is that true? Right? And then, wait, is that me? And so it can be really hard. One of the things that I've noticed a lot of times is that this stuff is really subtle. And so you'll see it in social situations where one person will control another person's narrative in a really subtle way. And then if like you've had a relationship, I mean, I've seen this for years. If you have a relationship with someone like this and you try to call them out, they'll be like, hold up, why are you making such a big deal over nothing? Right? And literally, and I don't know if it's that people don't see it, that because of the patterns of their communication, they don't see it, or if they're trying to actually convince you that nothing happened. But it's really interesting to hold people accountable. People will be like, you're flipping out, you know, or something like that. Why are you tripping? You know, why are you talking about, what are you even talking about? And it's really, you know, important in those situations, because if you can start to call people out and notice those situations, then it's really important to, you know, notice, okay, no, that's not what I said. I'm pointing, you know, this is what I'm saying. Our
parents or,
or, you know, our boss, our coworkers, or whoever it is. You know, and if you think about it, this is where that so much energy gets lost in worrying about what other people think. Worrying about how other people perceive me, or perceive, you know, what it is that I'm doing, is a super drain for energy. So when we're talking about self-defense, it really is about, it's a personal thing. Now, and just to make this really clear, that all of these situations that we've talked about, you have to give consent. Usually it's unconscious consent. You know, with the exception of being punched in the face, right? You don't have to consent to that. But, you know, but in order for someone to control our narrative in some way, we have to give them that power. Right? Someone can't do that without, usually we don't agree to it consciously, but a lot of times we unconsciously agree to it. And it's hard because, you know, like we talked about, a lot of times it's your partner or your closest friends who do that, and they tell some story, and it's a subtle feeling like, wait, that's not really what I experienced. If you start to notice that, so this trying to control someone's narrative goes on this subtle social level, all the way up to the level of fascism, which is like the ultimate intent to control a narrative. Is we're going to burn books, we're going to silence opposing viewpoints, we're going to in actually imprison people who have an alternate take or kill, or all of these things. So it's the same. That's the same violence. It's really interesting because how do you fight that? If we react to it and try to fight it, it's hard, because I look at, like, for instance, not to bring it up again, but what's going on with Trump is that so many people their attempt to weigh, which is to start to look at the complexity of a situation. So instead of stereotyping people as good or bad and being, for or against, starting to look at the complexity of reality. And so things like compassion. So starting to go into a situation, and instead of saying you're wrong, and that's the depth of the relationship, instead of seeing each other as left and right, or good and bad, or all of these things, that's the same thing that's coming from the other side. Mm-hmm. You understand what I'm saying?
It's like hate and hate don't equal love. That's right.
So this punching skinheads, you guys have seen the videos of people punching skinheads? Mm-hmm. Yeah. They come up on my feed. And so it's a really interesting thing to think about, that is punching a skinhead violent?
Of course it is. I don't know, I think punching the wall is violent.
Right. So it's a superimposition of a narrative. And so it's again, it's this really interesting thing to think about, because we can go into this place of really starting to justify our own storyline being more valuable than someone else's. And that is violence. The non-violence is to allow other people to have their, and is there ways that we can not accept hateful speech that are non-violent?
I think so. I'm not saying that there aren't other ways. I'm saying that's one strategy. Mm-hmm. And it's obviously what's making press.
What's one strategy?
Punching people.
Punching people.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So and I think we're in agreement that that's a violent, way, is trying to silence someone because they have a different opinion than you, just as a principle. And it does, and we could talk about right and wrong. Are people wrong? You're right. Someone speaking hate speech. Is that coming from a place of being awake? No, of course not. Is it coming from a place of awareness? No, it's probably most definitely always coming from a place of deep suffering.
Sure.
Right? But then what is the nonviolent approach? Is it to, silence someone because they're suffering and they're ignorant? This is kind of what we get to, because we get to be in these situations. This is the world that we live in. These things are really happening. And and then at the same time, so this brings up another element. You're referring to 3 trans people were killed this last week. Yeah. And so this brings up another element of self-defense, as if your life is literally threatened. What is the most effective? Is it violent to have a gun? So these are things that we could get to start to take into consideration. Is self-defense violent? Is it violent to defend yourself from someone who's trying to inflict violence on you?
Sure, if we're eliminating like the aspect of like what's the right or wrong thing to do in a situation, like if someone attacks me and I have a gun and I fire the gun at them, it is violent. I mean, I still might be taking a life, or I still might be injuring someone.
Is it violent? And so it's an interesting thing. So we talk about I guess we'd have to kind of define violence a little bit more to really start to, but if we're kind of going back to like someone superimposing a narrative onto someone else, then someone maintaining their ability to have their own narrative, is that violent? If someone's literally attacking you, trying to silence you, is it violent to defend yourself against them?
Well, I don't know. Can we define violence then?
Yeah, and I think that would be an interesting thing. I've told this story before, which is really interesting to me, because it's just an insight, and I've been trying to comprehend it for years. But it's, these two people were in battle, and one's about to kill the other when he spits in his face. And so he walks away. He says, I don't want to kill you in anger. I don't want to kill you as part of my personal vendetta or my agenda. Right? I had no problem killing you. It would have been non-violent for you to kill you as the expression of my duty, right? As a warrior, to protect my family, to protect my community. We're at war. This is something that happens. But now that I have a personal vendetta against you, this is something that has karma. You guys see that, the difference? If you kill someone with a personal vendetta, as you opposed to you kill someone who, as the expression of protecting your,
Well, I
whatever.
can see how that brings it to like a yogic state, like intention is everything, no matter what you're doing. But does that still make it non-violent? Isn't death still violent? Like, even if death happens naturally, you fall off a cliff and your body's shattered into pieces, isn't that still feel like a violent death?
So maybe violence is not the word that we're looking for. But I think about those two, as we were talking about these two people. There's the after effects, if you will, of the two acts of violence are very different, right? So the one, you did it from duty, you can kind of leave it behind. It wasn't yours.
But
There's karma involved, but it wasn't yours.
yeah, so you broaden the scope of that, and then you look at who imposed that duty on that person, and is
It was
that
their
imposition?
karma in some sense. It
Yeah.
was like
And that's
I'm in the
violent.
vehicle, right? But when I do it from my own anger, now you imagine that there may be echoes of that echo through my life. You see what I'm saying? So there's an act, but the act has a different effect based on how we approach it.
But even if it's your duty, isn't that still a justification for the action in a way? I mean, you can justify being a warrior and saying that, sending drones into, Yemen was part of your duty, and trying to disconnect yourself from something that still isn't necessarily justifiable.
Now we sign up to do that.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. It's like the landscape of the world when perhaps that story was kind of concocted versus the landscape of people's free will to enter those type of arrangements now.
Well, and it could have been the same too. People could have been conscripted in the past to fight an unjust war. Right? So when we're saying duty, it might not necessarily be like my duty is to work at Target. When we say duty, maybe a better word would be dharma, meaning that it's the highest expression of who you are. Right? So that would be the difference, is that if you're a soldier in the army who's doing things with drones that you don't believe in your heart of hearts, and you're doing it just because you were given orders, are you really doing your duty? Not your duty to the government, your duty to being a good human being, if you will? You know, are you really living up to your own, what you know, your conscience, your heart, your highest potential in this life? You know, if in the yogic sense, to me, that's when I think about your duty is to be the highest expression of who you can be in this life.
So someone who arguably is a conscientious objector to carrying a weapon or firing a weapon on the field has a different dharma than someone that chooses to, essentially, is what you're saying?
Well,
So if someone doesn't have that predilection to choose to not carry or shoot a firearm,
well, each of us has something that's our highest calling. You may find yourself in a situation at some time where you have the opportunity to prevent something happening to your child, right, or your community or something like that. So, you know, that's why I bring up this thing of self-defense. You know, is it somehow that when we think about nonviolence, is it a higher thing to just let you know, men with guns or swords come in and kill your family and your community? Or is it a higher thing to, if you're a warrior, to defend your family? You know, so these are really big questions. And we may not always have the, you know, have to think about this, but here's this thing, we're talking about there's 3 people who were killed this last week. And so now here's this thing, we're talking about self-defense again in yoga. What is an appropriate reaction to this? Is it to just lay down? Is that the non-violent thing to do? To lay down? And this situation comes up. So think about you know, the Nazis or whatever taking away the Jews. Was that the non-violent thing to let that situation happen? There's a superimposition. You see what I'm saying? There's a narrative that's being placed over an entire society.
So you're talking about protection versus like reaction. So the story about the skinheads, like somebody, you know, maybe they weren't necessarily being specifically threatened. They were just doing that out of reaction. Whereas like someone whose life is being threatened, their, you know, physical reaction to that, it changes the way that that's perceived then.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, I feel like the situations are different, but I mean, it'd be great if we came up with a different word then, because I mean, they still both feel violent, but just with different intention, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
but then if we're all connected and we're all expressions of each other, then how is that one person, even if you're not specifically being threatened by the Nazi, not essentially protecting someone else that wasn't, or that was being threatened?
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting thing. So, you know, because you go into these situations and then, you know, what does that look like? What does war look like? For some reason, I saw this also came up on my feed, this guy, I can't remember his name, I don't know if you guys saw this, it was like a PBS documentary, but it's this guy who, over the years, he's a piano player from Washington, D.C., and he is an African-American guy who befriends skinheads, befriends Ku Klux Klan leaders. Have you seen this? So anyway, I'll try to see if I can find a link. But this guy is really interesting. So he said that his driving force was, how can you hate me if you don't know me?
That does sound
Was it off of
I think I've
Vice
seen.
News?
No, it was PBS.
Because there's one that's similar that I just watched on Vice.
It could have been maybe the same guy.
He's a comedian, though.
No, this guy's a piano player.
Yeah.
And so, but anyway, what was really interesting was because he's been doing this since the 80s. It's not like a new thing for him, and he's written some books. But what he does is he would like arrange these meetings with clan leaders and be like, look, let's talk. You tell me your point of view, and I'll tell you my point of view. And so he ends up, going to these people's houses, or they come to his house, or these things, and listening to people, and then saying, look, I honor your opinion. I don't agree with it, but I honor your opinion. And so so it's this interesting thing where he's done this, but they had all these stories in this little movie where, for instance, there was he went to the head of the Ku Klux Klan in the state of Maryland, and he kind of sat down with the guy and they had a talk, and at that point they agreed to disagree. And then some other things happened, and I can't remember what ended up happening. Was the guy ends up, this is the head, whatever whoever he is, the head chairman or whatever, the Ku Klux Klan, ends up going 180 degrees and like quitting the Ku Klux Klan, giving his robes to this guy, and and so, but it wasn't just one person. If it was just one person, then it was. It's like, okay, this is this freak incident, but it wasn't. It was, person after person, situation after situation. One, he had been on I guess it was like Geraldo Rivera or something, and with like the Ku Klux Klan, he'd met this family who were like Ku Klux Klan. Anyway, it was like the thing was about kids in the Klan, who are kids who were like growing up to be in the Ku Klux Klan, and then the father ends up, doing something horrible and going to prison. And then this guy, I can't remember his name, but he goes and he ends up driving the wife and the daughter. He calls her on the phone and she, calls him all this stuff, and he goes, "Would you shut up for a second? I'm going to drive down there and I'm going to drive you up to the prison to visit your husband." And it was funny because she said that no one from the Ku Klux Klan had ever offered to do that. This husband had been in this maximum security prison. So he ends up driving them up there. And it was the same thing. They came out and did like a total 180, like spoke out against the Klan. And the woman ended up marrying a black guy. And this is his daughter who was, in the Klan. And so it's really interesting. I think these situations are really interesting because rather than just punching people in the face, there's this opportunity to actually connect with people as human beings, to honor them, and for that hate to find another way of going.
It's interesting to me that the Ku Klux Klan leaders were willing to sit down and have a conversation.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, like what do
I
you...
wish I could show you this video. I'll have to find a link for it
Because I think that's really unique. Because what if someone is so stuck in their belief that you resort to punching them in the face because they don't sit down and listen, or they're not willing to meet you in a conversation.
Well, I mean, I'm sure for everyone that did decide to meet with him, there are hundreds more who decided not to.
Yeah.
Find the holes in their posture on their own eventually anyway. It's not an easy thing to do. And so when I'm talking about anti-Trump, what I've come to understand about fascism and violence is that in order to be violent, we have to in some way not see someone, to not really see who someone is. And one of the most prevalent ways is to stereotype someone, to see someone's label, to see an oversimplification of someone, to see a category, to see someone's, the label that we've slapped onto someone. Like put someone in a really simple box and then see them as that box. instead of seeing the actual human being that's there
Internally,
internally.
yeah.
And so then again, if we're looking at it in terms of like a narrative, it's really, again, it's interesting to look at. So this is a kind of self-violence, you know, it's your own mind being violent against yourself. Right? So when I have resentful thoughts, there's a way that that stores in the body. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm resenting someone, then that has a certain effect on the nervous system and the muscles and the joints and the way lymph flows and the immune system. Everything's affected by the frequency. Where did that resentment come from? No, we don't know. This is like some kind of echo. Usually, you know, these are learned behaviors usually. And so, you know, it's some kind of echo of something that we've heard or perceived. I mean, there's lots of places where we could pick this energy up. But again, I'm interested in looking at this as like a narrative. Like, is there a narrative that we've adopted that's not really ours? And this is kind of, to me, again, it comes back to Dharma, if you will. That you have a highest expression. And is it violent against yourself to be anything, to be less than your potential? Right? So you have a capacity in this life to do something very unique that no one else can do because of your unique set of circumstances. So everyone is a different set of circumstances. We have different perspectives. We have different personal histories. We have a personal set of circumstances, and because of that, you have a unique ability to do something. But a lot of times we don't. We do something else. Why do we do something else? You know, if I have the capacity to heal, to be a resonator of love, why do I take on this narrative of resentment or hate as a yogi? Does anyone do that? I do. I when I pay attention, I'll notice a lot of times that I'll be hating someone else. I'll something good will happen, and there'll be a narrative within me. Something good will happen to someone else, and there'll be a narrative to me that's cynical about that or sarcastic about that. You know, so this is, you know, paying attention to the mind at this level, to me, is a really powerful thing. Because there's a huge cost to doing that. So when I see other people having success, to hating them for being successful. When I see other people, you know, who are experiencing happiness, for, you know, resenting them for being happy, there's a real cost to that. Can you imagine what might be the cost to doing that?
It narrows your perspective to remember your own inherent like happiness, or like see your own circumstance for what it's worth. It kind of like pushes gratitude to the background of any.
Definitely.
Abstraction from that.
We suffer. I suffer when I'm in resentment or anger or, you know, or hate. I really suffer with that frequency. It doesn't feel good. But what about, is there even an unconscious message to myself, like, that I shouldn't be successful? If I hate other people for being successful, then I shouldn't be successful. So this is straight from, the reason I'm talking about these examples, this is straight from the Chitta Prasadana in the Yoga Sutras. He says, happiness for the good fortune of others. Right? So this is a yoga practice. Patanjali talks about happiness for the good fortune of others. Joy when you see virtue. So what's virtue? It's kind of what we've been getting at, virtue. So this drone operator saying this is not all right. This is not, here example, Edward Snowden, right? So Edward Snowden, feels in his heart of hearts that what he's doing is not right. And so he steps up, and even though it's very inconvenient to listen to your heart, we can really see in this situation with Edward Snowden, it was a really inconvenient thing to do. He steps up and does what he thinks is right. You see what I'm saying? That's virtue. Virtue being aligned with your heart. And so, joy in seeing virtue. Compassion for suffering. So where do we see suffering?
Everywhere, all the time.
That's it. Yeah. And then this last one, disregarding
The wicked.
evil. Yep, disregarding wickedness. So instead of being anti-Trump, you see what I'm saying? Is why even focus on Trump at all? Why give Trump any energy? And then instead of being anti-skinhead, being the spontaneous expression of righteousness in this present moment, irregardless of what anyone else is doing.
Well, there's an interesting thing to think about too. Is Trump actually evil? Like, is he wicked, or is he just not awake, or like in a limited view of perception? Whereas like someone who's actually trying to kill off an entire race of people, like what Hitler did to the Jews, like that's inherently evil. Like, to me, Trump just seems like he's not awake. I don't
necessarily see any difference between Trump and Hitler, but that word evil is really interesting. And so I believe in Swami Veda Bharati's version of the Yoga Sutras, he specifies disregard for that which appears to be evil, right? Which is a really important distinction, because to say something's evil
would be duality.
We'd have to define evil.
Yeah.
We'd have
We'll
to
also impose our own beliefs on these people.
right.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
my personal opinion.
Right. It's a personal opinion. And so, but if it appears to be evil, that's good enough, right? So sometimes something appears to be evil, but as we become more aware, it's not evil. Can you think of an example of something that appears evil,
I
but is?
mean, like, are you talking about like cheetah killing a zebra kind of thing?
It could be that, yeah. That's a good example, right? So that's nature. Is war evil? I mean, we'd have to define evil if we want to have this conversation and see what it is. But war too is nature, just like a zebra killing a lion killing a zebra, right? That's nature. War is nature. And when I say nature, I'm not saying that it's like something that has to be that way, but it's nature in that it's actually happening. You see what I'm saying? So it's nature, defining nature as it's the nature of things, right? Isn't it? So war is the nature of things. And so if we can see this, is war evil? That's, again, we'd have to start to take a look at that. So I feel like those four are really good self-defense practices, like right off the bat. And we've gotten to a pretty subtle level if we're talking about happiness for the good fortune of others, and joy in the face of virtue, compassion for suffering, and disregard for evil. But we can apply this in a lot of ways. If we're focused, when I'm focused on evil, whether that be the Trump or the Illuminati or the KKK or whatever it is, that's heavy. That's a heavy burden to carry around. And the question then becomes self-defense. How is that burden serving my ability to be the highest expression of my dharma? How is that burden affecting my health, my, all of these things? It's like you talk about, we put on your oxygen masks first. If I'm suffering under this, is that going to be the best way that I can serve others or respond, be in conversation with this present moment? I'm already handicapped by the perspective that I've taken. So, I think that there's a lot of questions that is it violent to defend yourself from violence? Partner, someone's going to hurt your partner.
Yeah.
And so this is really interesting, because I think this comes back to the question what Breezy was saying, that people are being murdered right now, and so what is the correct response to that? Right? If you see that your friends are in danger of being murdered, or that someone is threatening your family, your community, is there a way to respond to that skillfully and non-violently, in a way that's not necessarily just laying down and saying, okay, kill us. You see what I'm saying? So we're talking about self-defense today, and in the context of yoga, and I think these are really big issues. They're not limited to this time or place or this particular set of circumstances. These are really big issues. Is it ever nonviolent to kill? A story that comes to mind, and I don't know, we just throw this into the fire too, is Yogananda meditating, and the mosquitoes are biting him all over. And his teacher says, just kill the damn mosquitoes. You remember this? Mm-hmm. He says, you've killed them how many times in your head? Just do it. Another story that comes to mind is from the Bhagavad Gita. Do you remember only a fool thinks that anyone can kill or be slain? Remember this? From the Bhagavad Gita, only a fool thinks that anyone can kill or be slain. He says, so Krishna is telling Arjuna to go kill his enemy. He says, go kill your enemy. He said, don't you know? They're already dead. I killed them. Who's Krishna? He's the supreme. It's time. Like they're already dead. The only reason that they don't appear dead is because of time. Everyone here is already dead. You see what I'm saying?
But it's the matter and how they become dead.
Does it matter?
No, not whether it matters or not.
Yeah.
I think the question is like, is there a violent way to die, or is there a non-violent way to die?
Because that is karma. I mean,
right. I mean, you're
right?
Whatever. I could die by somebody killing me, or I could die just by getting old, and then are those equally violent because I'm already dead?
Can you guys see different perspectives with that? Can you see a perspective where those would be equal? Mm-hmm. Where it'd be equal to die by a knife or a gunshot as to die lying in bed? Are they equal? So we step all the way back to this, supreme consciousness. And even calling it supreme consciousness is unequal. But but we talk about this yoga, which is this total non-attachment, and it's the sameness of everything. Right? So you live, you die today. The same. You can see that as we get step back far enough that we can see. And so these are hard perspectives, because this is a total I don't want to say immoral, but non-moral way of looking at the world. There's no right or wrong. Everything is equal, right? So even the most horrific violence is equal to a flower.
It's not really non-moral, it's like amoral.
Amoral, yeah. Yeah, it's amoral. That's exactly. And so, you know, and you can see that, and that's something like Kali Ma, right? We think of Kali Ma as amoral, right? Kali Ma wipes out a village, sends the plague, you know, these things. And so from our personal perspective, we think it's so evil what's happening here, but it's just nature. It's the nature of things. Said everyone dies. So okay, so we have this perspective. Is this useful at all in how we address this situation of self-defense? Can you see any way that could be expressed or understood through that context?
Well, from like supreme consciousness context, it seems almost unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of back to like what Adriana's saying, like why bother then? Like if I'm already dead, like
That's
do
what
I
Arjuna
protect
said, though.
myself?
Why bother?
Mm-hmm. Well, I
Why
mean, but then
bother?
there's the argument of like the dharma that you live into, but then that, I mean, if there's no karma, there's no dharma then either.
So is there a karma to giving up? Is
Couldn't
there?
you argue that like Arjuna already gave up in his head anyway though? Like I mean, if he had his way, he would have like laid down.
Mhm.
And so like whether he actually does the action or not, like his intention was not to do it.
So that's an interesting point, and I think, but like to keep it on track here and relevant, you know, because stuff does happen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, your family could be attacked, and I have kids, and so I think about these things: someone trying to hurt my kids, or someone trying to hurt my community, or someone, you know, what do? You so okay, so Trump is Hitler, right? And the troops roll out, and they start rounding up immigrants or gays or, you know, or whoever it is that is becomes the object of hate of this regime. You know, this is a possible scenario. Is it non-violent to just not do anything? So Hitler is coming through town rounding up the Jews. Is that non-violent to not say anything, to not do anything?
Or is it the violence to yourself to not do anything?
This is a good question. Is it violent? You know, this is this Bhagavad Gita situation where Krishna is laying down in non-violence. I don't want to fight the war. I don't want to give up. I don't want to fight the war.
So is it pretty much just the best self-defense is presence and responding in alignment with your highest self in the moment with what your conscience essentially says is the right thing to do in the moment? I mean, someone's attacking my kid, and yeah, I can say completely out of context that I don't think that I would want to react violently, but then if I'm actually present and in the moment, and in that moment, you know, pushing this person out of the way in front of a train so they don't shoot my kid is somehow...
Well, it seems like inaction is violent by permission. Like
Mhm.
you're validating
Yeah.
that their actions.
Yeah.
You're agreeing to someone else's narrative.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
When you're agreeing, are you supporting a narrative by agreeing to it?
Yeah, and it's validating it.
Right? And so, you know, if we started this at a really kind of like an interpersonal level of like two friends, and one of them tries to tell you how you feel. But then if you look at this like on a social level, now at the level of government, we have a narrative. And is that, you know, so is it nonviolent to stand up for our own narrative? Nonviolent or self-defense, or you know, this is this kind of interesting space. Someone's trying to control your narrative, and you say, excuse me, can I be the spokesperson for myself?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going, I think what you said is really right on point. That the highest form of self-defense is being the spontaneous expression of your deepest heart in any situation. Does that make sense?
One more time.
The highest form of self-defense is to be the spontaneous expression of your deepest heart in any situation.
But is self-defense inherently nonviolent?
That we didn't figure that out, I don't think. I don't think there's any agreement.
A solid answer, because in the situation of like your children, I think it's inherently violent. Personally, if someone is going to mess with my child, I don't think that my filter is on like should I or shouldn't I. It's like protect my child. But for the instance of like, you know, Trump rolling out a regime, if you think back into like when that was happening in Nazi Germany, there was ways to be nonviolent. There were people that didn't agree with Hitler that hid Jews in their house, you know, that helped them in ways that weren't like, I'm going to kill a Nazi because they're in my neighborhood, but they were resisting in a way that was probably the spontaneous expression.
It may have been that by the time that it was such a small resistance, because in order for that experience to have happened, a lot of people had to give permission for that to happen. So there was a few people who were, you know, taking this stance, but that happened, you know.
Well, I'm speaking to a different way of how that might transpire. Like some people, a lot of people did give permission, but it's a different reaction in the moment to say like someone going to hurt your child. You might be inherently violent, whereas like that situation wasn't inherently violent.
So violent is a weird word to use here, because what we're really talking about is ahimsa, which is not harming. It's the intention of not harming. So here's an example. Someone has a tumor in their body, right, that's going to kill them. Is it violent to cut the body open and take out the tumor? What do you think?
It's violent to the tissue, but non-harming to the person.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting thing, because we're talking about is it non-harming? It's, you know, this is.
I mean, you're gonna harm their body. It's gonna hurt them.
It's gonna hurt them, but they have a burst appendix, right? And so they're gonna die if you don't do the surgery.
Right, like they're hurting either way. I mean, you're getting into like a.
Well,
does it hurt more? Does it hurt less?
Well, you know, theoretically, if you do the surgery right, you take out the appendix, they can live a long, healthy life. And so, you know, this is kind of when we're looking at ahimsa. We also have to look at the intention. Right? What is the intention? Is the intention to hurt the person, and that's why we're cutting the body open? No, the intention is to help the person. And we're cutting the body open, and so there's this hurt that happens, but what your intention is to be helpful. Now, if we were to take that and put that back on this situation, your kids, is your intention to hurt this intruder who's going to hurt your kids?
No, the intention is to
protect your children. You see a little difference there? Like if I were to just shoot someone, there's a karmic echoes that might happen. If I were to just shoot someone for no reason, there may be karmic echoes that happen. And when I talk about that, I'm not talking about like mysterious magical things that are going to happen, like, you know, that you're going to get shot magically as a reflex of karma. I'm saying that in your subconscious patterns, we have to live with that aspect. Like that makes a really big impression on our subconscious mind. And so we're going to be living with the repercussions, the karmic patterns, the subconscious patterns of that act. Is that different when I shoot someone who is an intruder in my house who's trying to hurt my child? Right? It's one thing if you just shoot someone because they, you know, came to your door, but another thing, you understand now this person has an intention to hurt, to kill my family, my community, my, you know, whatever it is. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. It's different.
It is a different intention that's behind it. And so, you know, it's a fine line as we look at all of these things, you know, from a point of view of yoga being connected to your source. I mean, I think we could understand from this perspective that violence isn't right or wrong. When we talk about ahimsa, again, these aren't the 10 Commandments. This isn't moral codes. This is a yoga practice. And people, I think, get that really confused and say, well, Arjuna, why did Krishna tell Arjuna to go to this battle and kill these people? Isn't that violence? So, you know, ultimately there is no answer that anyone else can give you to any of these questions. That's the beauty of it. That's the abstraction of it. Right? That's the opposite of the fascism, is that the fascism is to say that this is the answer. Here's the answer. It's simple. Right? These people are the problem. We just need to build a wall and keep them out. And it's so simple. Don't you see? They're bad. Right? Here's the scapegoat. That's the problem. Right? And so the solution isn't to say, in my understanding, isn't to say that this person, the Republicans, the Ku Klux Klan, that's the problem. Don't you see? All we need to do is eliminate these people or silence these people. That's the same exact thing. The solution is the abstraction. To stop seeing people in simplistic ways. To stop seeing a KKK member and see someone who's suffering. Maybe? Or someone who there's an opportunity for healing here. Do you have to do that? No, you certainly do not. No one has to do anything. There's not a right or a wrong way for you to be in this moment. But as opposed to the tactics which hate uses, right? So seeing the complexity, seeing the shades of gray, instead of seeing things in black and white, inhabit the gray space, the in-between space. Right? There are no clear answers. There is no right or wrong. Right? That's the fascist approach. This is right. That's wrong. Right? It's the in-between spaces. I hope it's recollects everything else that we've talked about every other day. When we're talking about yoga, we're always talking about Sushumna, the space between the inhale and the exhale, the space between waking and dreaming, between dreaming and sleeping. So these ambiguous places are the doorway to samadhi. Samadhi, if we were going to define that in just really simple terms, we'd say when the observer and the observed cease to be separate. And so we say namaste, we say, I'm recognizing myself in you. I'm seeing myself in an other. Instead of seeing ourselves as oppositional, as self and other, I'm seeing myself when I see you. And so if we were going to define that in really practical terms, and we've talked about this, but that's love. Right, so love is the absence of resistance. It's the free flow. Not talking about romantic love, but unconditional love. And so unconditional love is a love that's not limited by conditions. And so, you know, rather than being amoral, I think amoral, you know, it sounds kind of like cold and detached, almost like psychopathic. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, well, we could do all kinds of horrible things and it doesn't matter one way or the other. It's different than that. It's a little bit different. It's almost the same. It's unconditional love. So an unconditional love is a love that knows no limits. What's the difference between love and hate? Can you imagine an unconditional hate? What would an unconditional hate be? to hate everything, right? To say no to everything. No, 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 no. That's really what hate is to say no. Whereas love is to say yes. So we imagine this is almost the same. To say no to everything, but very different. Or to say yes to everything.
But like basically the same.
Basically the same, but way different. I mean, experientially way different. So imagine you say no to everything.
I know, but imagine saying yes to everything. You don't even think about it. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't, if your response is like, if your response is the same to everything, then it, like, nothing.
Could be, although to me a no is a way of saying, stopping it, the flow of energy. Whereas a yes is a way of offering the flow of energy. So if you say, so it's because love and hate are not the same thing. Right? If you put love into a baby, it's a certain frequency. There's a flow of energy. You're giving, you're allowing this love. They're the expression of love. Okay? Is karma loving? What is karma?
What's karma?
Karma is karma? What is karma? Let's define karma in more practical terms.
Karma's like the ripple effect of your action.
It's karma is action,
Yeah.
right? So karma usually gets translated just as action. And then what we also know is that every action has a reaction. So if you had no karma, what would your experience be?
You would not have been born or died or ever had a body.
You would not exist, right? Yep, exactly. So we want karma. If you enjoy having a body, if you want to have a body, you need to have karma. Every body has karma. The goal isn't to not have karma. So is karma loving? You know, this is this really interesting thing. Now you could say karma is karma, it's not loving. That's a valid, I mean, we're just slapping a label onto something again. But when we talk about karma, another word for karma is nature. Right? Is karma nature?
Yeah.
Is nature. What's another word for nature? Ma. Right? So we talk about the Divine Mother. We talk about property, nature. Right? So why is nature matter? Right? Nature, matter, gross and subtle. Why is nature described as the Divine Mother? It's very generous. So you can see it that nature is, if we talk about love as the free flow of energy. Remember we talked about love as an expansion? Right? Love is an expansion as opposed to stopping the flow of energy. Love is the free flow of energy. What does that look like in the world? Nature, change. Who are we talking about? The Divine Mother. Right? This is one way that this is something. This is actually, Divine Mother, again, that's a label. But this is an experience. We're talking about the present moment, which is constantly changing, which is nature, which is presenting. So we said, is it unconditionally loving? Well, if you step back far enough, you could see, wow, it's extremely freaking generous, at least. What else gives like this? Do you ever wake up and it's not here? Do you ever stop and pay attention and it's not here? It's always here. And so when we're talking about something that's unconditional, the nature is unconditional. You see what I'm saying? It's unconditional in nature. So that's why people call it Ma. Because think about, who loves unconditionally? Most people don't. Your mom loves you unconditionally. theoretically. Not every mom lives up to this, but that's this divine principle of motherly love, is this unconditional love. Whoever you grow up to be, it's a good person, a bad person, you'll always be my baby. I'll always love you. Right, so this is this very beautiful, is it true? Now, Breezy, you always take us back to this like cold, like I want to say nihilism, you know, like it's like unconditional hate, you know. And so I don't know, you know, I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know if it matters, but it does really matter. It matters extremely much to see the entire cosmos and the entire world as the expression of unconditional love instead of meaningless, right? Of not mattering. So you could say that nothing matters. I told you guys about this, right? So my teacher, you know, I came to this place in my meditation and it was extremely liberating. Nothing matters. It doesn't matter if I meditate. Really realizing it doesn't matter if I meditate. It doesn't matter if I reach enlightenment. That's enlightenment, is realizing it doesn't matter if I reach enlightenment. Nothing matters. I'm finally free. Before I was chasing this experience that was, you know, this I needed to be complete. Now I feel complete, whether I reach that or not. You know, so nothing matters. And kind of coming to this place and wow, you know, this huge insight. And I saw my teacher that morning, which I feel very lucky for. I said, nothing matters. And he said, is that it? Or does everything matter? Right, so this is an interesting distinction. Right, are we really being honest if we say that it doesn't matter if you kill my child? If you kill my child, it doesn't matter because everyone's dead anyway?
Or it does matter.
It really does matter. It matters more than anything. It matters what I do in this present moment. Right? In the grand scheme of the cosmos, we can see how it doesn't matter. Everyone dies. But that's why Arjuna, get up. Arjuna's saying, I can't. He's saying nothing matters, so get up and act like it matters. Get up and be the highest expression of your heart right now. Stop lying there on the ground, letting the enemy walk over you. Stop letting someone else create the narrative. You who are connected to your heart of hearts, you more than anyone have a responsibility to stand up right now. You see what I'm saying?
But how is that the distinction between nothing matters and everything matters?
It's experiential. The way that you carry yourself and that you hold yourself in this present moment, which is all there is. So all there is this moment. Right? Is there anything other than this moment? So everything that you do in this moment matters. What else matters other than what you do in this moment? It's letting go of the future and the past to realize that what you do, the way that you hold your attention in this present moment matters. Are you holding your attention in a loving way or in a hateful way?
But if you're able to do both, isn't
Do
that
both
reaching
what?
non-separateness?
You
You're
mean-
not even, like, if you're able to love everything unconditionally and hate everything unconditionally, you've definitely reached a point where hate and love are equal, and not even hate and love can be separate.
That's beautiful, yeah. I see that. Absolutely. And so that really reminds me too of Rama's dispassion at the beginning of Yoga Vasishtha. You remember Rama's dispassion? He hates everything. Rama's perspective is, he says, no, I don't want to have a wife and kids. No, thank you. Right? No, I don't want lands and fortune. No, thank you. Why? So that I can become lost in pleasure and suffer and get in dis-ease? No, thank you. Keep your money, keep your power, keep your beautiful women, keep your whatever it is. Keep it. No. So he's in unconditional hate. But is that a complete realization? Was Rama stumbling around depressed? This is the problem. This is the premise for the book, is that you're almost got it. You've reached disillusionment. Right? You've thrown off the illusion that most of us are chasing pleasure. Most of us are chasing power. Right? You realize that none of these things will ever satisfy you. It's almost complete. Do you guys remember what the other part of the teaching was? So that was the first part, is that nothing will ever make you whole or happy. Right? That's he unconditionally despises everything. Right? What's the next part of the teaching? It's really, actually, it's pretty, in some ways it's cold, but the next part, if you remember, was that whatever a person focuses on and believes is true, they experience as reality.
Mm-hmm.
Is it really reality? No, it's not. It's not real. What's real? Non-separateness. There's no perspective. But mental slavery. So does it matter that we're mental slaves? No. But yes, what matters more than to stand up and be the highest expression of your heart in this situation?